Go.
Welcome to the PRCA Fuse podcast for the stories behind great PR and people with a passion for communications, hosted by myself, Farzana, speaking every fortnight to trailblazers in and around our industry. Our special guest today is Amanda Coleman. Amanda, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Amanda, I'm going to let the audience in just about how expert you are in your domain. Incredibly impressive. Amanda is the crisis communication specialist and the director and founder of Amanda Coleman Communication Limited. Based in the UK, she has more than 25 years experience in crisis and emergency communication. Author of Crisis Communication Strategies, published back in 2020, the year of COVID. Also, she has published Everyday Communication Strategies back in 2022, and her third book is out now. It is called Strategic Reputation Management. It was published back in November last year. Now, Amanda led the law enforcement communication response to the Manchester Arena terrorist attack in 2017. Now, she provides consultancy support to private and public sector organizations facing challenging times, as well as training individuals and teams to be more effective to communicate in a crisis. She began her life as a journalist. She's a chartered PR practitioner as well as a fellow of both the CIPR and the PRCA. She is an advisor for the Resilience Advisors Network, a senior associate of the Centre for Crisis and Risk Communication, and the chair of the UK Emergency Planning Society Communication Professional Working Group. Now, Amanda, how do you typically start your day? What's a typical work day in your life? Do you start your day in crisis? Tell us what is it like being a crisis expert in a world where crisis has increasingly become the norm? What's your typical work day?
Yeah, I think the good thing is that there isn't a typical workday. And I think a lot of people would say that in different kind of PR and comms roles. And that's part of the joy of doing it, I think, and part of the reason that it keeps it so fresh for us all. So there isn't a particularly sort of typical day. You wake up and usually do the usual that everybody probably does, which is check what's happened overnight, check the news, which seems to be constantly kind of updating with kind of major information and updates and changes and things that are happening around the world. And social media, I suppose, like everybody would expect, is just always there. And yeah, so I would usually do a whole troll through each of the social networks that I kind of lurk around to see if there's anything that's important. And then the rest of the day will just kind of flows as it does. Sometimes I'll be working at home. Sometimes I'll be working away at different places. I may have kind of deadlines around some planning work or training to get finalised for delivery. So it's really varied, and I think, I say, that's what keeps it interesting. I always have Sky News on in the background. So I think that was from going back being a journalist, busy newsrooms, lots of stuff happening. So even though I work on my own predominantly, and I'm in an office on my own, I forever have to have noise around me, which, is not everybody's cup of tea, but keeps me sane, I think.
Tell me about the young Amanda starting out, studying philosophy at the University of Bolton. How did you segue from philosophy to your first job?
Interestingly, I was going to say I never wanted to do a degree in philosophy, but I did not do as well as I should have done at my A-levels. So, I'm sure lots of people potentially have been in a similar position. And then it was like needing to find something because I knew I needed a degree because I wanted to do my postgraduate in journalism. And then the philosophy came up. I absolutely loved it. It was really enjoyable 3 years of being able to kind of think about big issues, and it was really, really interesting stuff to do. And then did my postgraduate journalism in Sheffield, and then throughout all my kind of formative years at school, whenever I was asked, I'd always say I wanted to be a journalist. But after doing that for about 5 years, kind of fell out of love. Journalism's changed a huge amount from kind of the late 19 sort of mid 1990s when I was first kind of in there. And that's when PR sort of popped up as something that I hadn't really thought that existed or that I could do. But then became the way my life developed.
And I wanted to ask, the undergrad that you did in philosophy, do you feel that you draw upon it, or was it useful for your career in the end, or not really?
Think it was in that you had to consider different arguments, different approaches, and then formulate a kind of position. You needed to, I mean, some of it was quite complex. Can't say I was the best student with some things. I did not enjoy the logic part of my degree, but I had to do it. I'm not. I'm going to say I don't think I've got a very mathematical brain. So yeah, I think it did bring a lot of sort of drawing your approach, and I think when you look at writing the books, definitely it helped with that because you know thinking through different situations and then being able to argue a position, which is effectively what a lot of the work I did in my degree was, definitely helped. Even though, yeah, I can't say I sit and think every day.
And what was it about journalism that drew you in, and what was it about journalism that eventually pushed you out of the industry and towards PR?
Yeah, what drew me in? I have no idea because there was nobody in the family that was a journalist. And there's something happened when I was at primary school because I've got notes from teachers that talked about, oh, wait to see your first articles in the Manchester Evening News. But there was something that obviously triggered it. And I've never been able to pin down exactly what that was. But there were a lot of very high-profile journalists at the time, Kate Adie and lots of others when you were younger that were just quite inspirational in how they did things. So that was always why I kind of wanted to do it, I think, because it seemed to be a very kind of noble, helping communities, etc. What pushed me out of it, I think, was a disillusionment that came from some of the realities of local reporting, and anybody who's done it will understand what that is. And I had a series of death knocks, going where somebody died and knocking on the door to get the information. And you do, oh, hopefully this is going to help the family, and I thought, is it really, or is it just that I have to get this picture and story to meet the editor's demands? So I think that was what kind of made me feel it was definitely there had to be something else after.
And then when you went into your first PR job, was that the Environment Agency?
Yeah.
Do you remember thinking, okay, this is where I've landed and this is where I want to be going forward? Did it draw you in PR and you thought, right, it's
Oh
it's
yeah.
similar to journalism but different,
Yeah.
um and it felt
Yeah,
right.
I absolutely loved it. I worked with an amazing boss, Sue Fox, who some people may know, and she's been around kind of PR for a long, long time. And she sold it to me. I think it's this is the thing that can make a difference, that can have a big impact, that can and can still do some of the things that I think kind of drove me in terms of the work, which is make a difference, help people, and hopefully leave things in a better position than when you started doing whatever you were doing. So yeah, I mean, it was a huge opportunity to learn as well. And I'm always grateful that I moved from journalism to a pretty junior job in PR because it is very different. And you had to kind of see it from the ground up rather than coming in at a senior position where I think you'd be heavily skewed by the journalist kind of background. I loved doing a campaign. I remember a campaign for around fly tipping, and it was in Workington with rugby players in the freezing cold doing some kind of photo thing. But yeah, I mean, every day was different. It had the excitement of the journalism that I suppose I'd have, but gave you a lot more opportunities and a lot of scope. And that was back when we had internet on one computer in the office. So it was, yeah, it was a very different set of circumstances, I think, than we're all dealing with now.
Do you think journalists who then go into PR, people such as yourselves, they have a bit of an advantage on other PRs that don't have a journalistic background because of their sort of their nose for a story? Do you think there's something about experience learning journalism at degree level or postgraduate, as well as practicing, that actually enhances a PR's sort of spidey senses?
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have said historically, going back a few years, yes. I think as the world's changing quite dramatically and the media is forced to change, and the way we consume news is changing really rapidly, I don't think it probably has got the same benefits as it used to have. I think that, you don't have to do a journalism degree. You don't have to work as a journalist. You can just be inquisitive and get a nose for what's going to be interesting. But I think what we all have to do is keep up with the trends and how things are changing. So, to some extent, I think having come from a quite sort of formal journalistic background can be quite restrictive, because perhaps you are seeing it from one lens, which was that historic kind of journalism lens, rather than the very changeable way that the world kind of is now.
So you spent some time at the Environment Agency, about a year and a half, but then you moved over to Merseyside Police, and then you ended up working towards being the head of corporate communications at Greater Manchester Police. What was it about working in the police that drew you in for so long? Because you stayed there for quite a long
Yeah,
time.
21 years.
That's a
21
long
years in
time.
policing. I know. It didn't feel 21 years when I was there. Um, I remember seeing the advert for the job at Merseyside, which was as a press officer, and thinking that sounded really interesting. Policing is really interesting in terms of the amount of things you get to deal with, and the particularly places like Manchester and Merseyside, busy. There's always things happening, and so that kind of appealed, I think, to where my brain was with the journalism in the past. And it seemed to be like a bit of a turning point where they were wanting to improve the flow of information, and be more open. So there was a lot of opportunities. So that's what drew me into that, definitely. What kept me there, I think, was just the ability to be able to see you're having a direct impact. So rather than being the person that was knocking on the doors to try and get the story from the family that have just gone through some terrible tragedy, you could be there as a press officer trying to help them through it and trying to give them some guidance on what they could do, organising some media's things. So there was a real tangible kind of direct impact. And you could see how with PR campaigns and initiatives you can actually help protect people. And the press office were able to put information out. You can see people being arrested, charged, and brought before the courts. So that's what kept me there, I think, for as long as I did. And I think, and again, it's a very Marmite job. I always say, I say Marmite job, and then I know that people outside the UK go, "What's Marmite?" Because I have to go, it's a horrible spread that some people love and some people hate. And I think police comms is very much like that. If you enjoy that and the pressure and all the challenges that come with it, then it's a great job. And if it's not for you, then it just really isn't for you. And so I think that's what kept me there for as long as I did. It's a very busy but enjoyable kind of position to be in. So but 21 years flew by.
And because it's so fast moving, and there was also a lot of pressure in terms of public trust, and you had various inquiries, and there's so much that you must have been juggling when you were heading their corporate comms, that going in as a head of corporate comms, it must have felt like crisis is just intrinsic to the role. And so at what point in your career did you realize that actually crisis isn't just intrinsic to the role? Crisis is actually a specialism that you really want to dig deeper on.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, it's like being a hamster on a wheel, and you get so used to what you're running, and you just so you inhabit that world of being the top three stories on Sky News because of things that you were dealing with was just commonplace. And it's only when you step out of it that I think you start to realise that is an unusual position to be in. And I think because I've been in it for so long, it was almost kind of institutionally accepting of that as a status quo. the big turning point for me, I think, with a lot of things, was obviously it was the arena, and was the kind of impact that that had, and the aftermath of that, huge kind of impact, and terrible kind of devastating impact on so many people, that I think a lot of people who've been through sort of really serious sort of situations, you get to the point of, I think that's me kind of done. Um, it's so much to kind of comprehend and to deal with, that you then start to feel as though it's time to do something else. It's what drove me as well to kind of push towards crisis, was the learning from that. I'm very passionate now. I get, really hung up with learning from other people's problems. There's lots of things that happened in the aftermath of the arena that I keep saying, we need to not be doing these things again, because we've got to learn, and we've got to make sure that the same problems are not occurring the next time something terrible happens, because life is full of kind of difficult things like that. And I think that's what drives me now, is that sort of desire to we can't make these things go away. We can try and prevent them, or minimize the impact, but we can certainly help people through it as much as possible. So yes, it was almost like a seamless transition in some respects, that once I'd left that sort of police environment, that it seemed like the natural place to be, particularly, as I say, from the experiences that I'd had.
Was it hard going from working in public sector to then launching your own business? Because for many people, it's quite a transition to go from public sector to work in private sector, but you took that further step in launching your own business in the private sector. What was that journey? That must have been quite daunting.
It was terrible. I'm coming up for 5 years, so it's like still really clear. I think there was a number of things. My first day being a self-employed kind of person running a business was lockdown day in the UK. So it's like suddenly everything that I thought it was going to be, it wasn't going to be, because the world had completely changed. And in a way, whilst that was really not a best place to be, because I hadn't known that kind of running a business self-employed before, I think I probably adapted to it a little easier. So, it was perhaps easier for me to flex and then go, okay, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to kind of, approach these things? That first year was really tough. And, I love it. I absolutely love what I do. And I'm glad that I pursued through the first year. Everybody tells you the first year running a business is the worst. And it brings with it lots of different challenges, so, the constant kind of, have I got enough work on? What's in the future? What am I going to do? And all those things are always going to be with you in a way that, I never used to particularly worry about when I worked in-house. But it definitely, it was the right move for me. And I get up, what gets you up out of bed in the morning? Every day I get up, I'm looking forward to work, which is a really blessed position to be in.
When you were working as head of corporate comms, you obviously had a big team to manage. You also had people around you to sort of, just do, bounce ideas off and get a bit of a sense check. How did you cope with losing that when you then went working, setting up your own business and not having that team around you, not having those people to access and sense check? And was that one of the reasons why you then started sort of moving towards volunteering, because that brought community into your life?
That's a really good point, actually. The community bit is important, and that I've been very lucky in that there's a lot of different communities that I kind of access. The PRCA kind of community, the sort of self-employed consultants group they've set up, and that was partly in response to the fact that everybody was struggling with the COVID situation, but was great because we used to have a weekly touch base. How's everybody doing? So you are kind of naturally building those sort of networks, and I think that's, like you say, that community is really important. One of the biggest things I missed was just somebody to go, can you put this in, can you do a website? Can you just do this? And can you do me a piece of, can you just trim this video? And suddenly you're like, I have to do that myself. I've got to learn how to get a piece of editing software and use it. And yeah, that's a different mindset and takes some time to get used to. But I actually love the fact that there are things I can do now I could never have done because I've had to learn how to do them. That said, I'm in a fortuitous kind of lucky position now that I have like a virtual PA to help keep me on track with some things, and various kind of associates that I will work with. So that gives me the best of both worlds. I think the fact that I still can do work with other people, it is, gives you some of that. But community is a really important one, I think, when you're working remotely, even not just on your own, in terms of business.
And Amanda, running your own business, is it your 5-year anniversary next month or this month?
It will be next month because it's March.
Oh,
So yes.
oh, wow. And what I wanted to know is, what services and sort of areas of consulting did you start out giving and thinking that that would be your sort of like, USP? And how has that changed over the 5 years? Because, I know a lot of people set up businesses and they're very sort of adamant that this is what I'm going to do. These are going to be my clients. And then actually the reality is sometimes it's completely different. So talk us through what you were focused on delivering to the market at the early stages of running your business, and what does it look like now? What do you do? Who do you work with? Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is the things that I thought I wanted to do, I probably, and I was going to do, are where I am now, but it's taken 5 years to get there. So in that first year, when I set up, I was always going to be doing crisis communication work. I did lots of non-crisis work that first year because you have to kind of establish and to keep paying the bills and everything else you have to do. And then I'd wanted to do some training. I wanted to do some kind of hands-on support work when incidents happen because that's where I'm most comfortable. Um, but I didn't really have, and this is it's probably my terrible position. And I did have a business coach. I was very lucky to be given a business coach because it was during COVID. And he's like, "What's your plans? And I'm like, "I haven't gotten it. I'm just enjoying the kind of ride." And I think it's probably a good position to be in because I didn't set myself a particular client group that I was going to work with, and I didn't set myself particular kind of parameters. So I've kind of got where I wanted to be, but it's sort of taken 5 years of bits of things and doing things in a slightly different way, and perhaps things that I wasn't looking for. And now, as I say, a lot of the work in the early days was public sector, because of the connections I had. Whereas now it's probably 50-50, if not a bit more private sector. And I'm really enjoying the difference that brings, and getting to work with different sectors and industries and businesses, and to get to know all about them, and then do the piece of work, and then go and get to learn about somebody else, and do some more work. So yeah, so I think it's probably my, my lack of focus, that led me to sort of be where I wanted to be, over 5 years.
Amanda, your work, is it predominantly UK centric or do you work internationally?
Yeah, I mean, this is an odd one because, of course, lockdown happened and you could work from home with anywhere. So one of my first clients was in Europe, because they'd found me on LinkedIn, on the internet, on stuff, and I spoke to them and then was able to help them with an issue they were having. And that really sort of opened my eyes a little bit, even in those early stages when, things were tough. Of You don't need to just look in the UK; you can look outside. And God, this last year I've been all over the place. So I've been to Slovenia and Latvia and Switzerland, and I absolutely love it. It's never as glamorous as people think it is going working away, as anybody that does it will know, because you kind of land somewhere, and if you're not careful, you don't see anything. You do the work and then you fly out again. But yeah, so I do enjoy that, and it brings different challenges and an understanding different communities, which again for me is what keeps life really interesting.
And Amanda, in an ideal world, clients will come and say, we want to really prevent, crisis. We want to reduce the risk. We want to work on risk mitigation. We want to work on building reputational resilience. How much of your work is focused on the sort of mitigation planning, and how much of it is, oh my God, this has just happened, Amanda, help?
It's probably about a 50-50. To be fair, I'd like it to be more in that kind of planning phase, planning and testing. I'm a sucker. I love a crisis simulation. I use a piece of software that replicates social media and does all the stuff. And it's lovely. And I go back to kind of a bit of my journalism background when you're trying to write a scenario that somebody's going to have to test through. I would like it to be more in that. But then again, I know I live in a world of fairies and unicorns where everybody's got loads of time to go and spend, planning for a crisis. The reality is people are stretched anyway. So the thoughts of spending time about looking at something that may or may not happen is not going to happen. So I think, for me, I kind of, expect it's always going to remain a bit of a 50-50 thing. Um,
Do you think that COVID increased company organizational sort of appetite for bringing in a crisis expert such as yourself? Because COVID, I think, blindsided many, and all of a sudden people were aware of black swan and white swan events. So do you think actually the timing of your launch of your consulting actually worked quite well in terms of how COVID reshaped people's attitude to risk?
yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting one because what happened in reality when COVID hit was everybody kind of closed in and they sort of put boundaries up and were looking very inwardly. So they didn't want anybody from outside helping them through it or telling them what to do because they were going to kind of just try and manage it themselves. And that was but it was a very odd time for everybody, obviously, to have such a widespread um, incident issue happening and affecting everybody at the same time. Um, I think there was lots of aftermath of kind of COVID where you saw more focus on being crisis ready and understanding that you had everything in place. But then it wanes like everything, and people kind of think, well, we've done COVID, so we're okay now. What they don't see, and I think it's not just the nature of the changeable elements of the world, which we're all kind of seeing and dealing with, but the way communication's changing. So I was writing kind of crisis communications plans a year ago, which are different now today because of the changeable nature and the fractured nature of social media and communication. So I think there's a lot of changeable aspects. So that's what we all need to keep kind of focusing on. So often it's only when something huge happens to affect an industry that the rest of the industry starts to realise it's not necessarily in the right place and it could improve and perhaps it needs to take a look. So I think it's a constant push to try and encourage people to see the importance of it.
And like you have divorce lawyers, and you sometimes hear about them sort of giving marriage advice. Um, so, do you sort of feel, as a crisis specialist, you can actually give advice to people on how to reduce the chance of having it, how to sort of run their organizations in a way that really reduces those sort of like those crisis likelihoods, better governance? Do you start seeing patterns? And then you can sort of retrospectively work backwards and sort of see the origins of them, and you start to sort of watch organizations in slow motion, and you know where they're heading.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting one because I think that kind of sums up the latest book, the kind of reputation management book, which is looking at things like governance and really understanding your reputation in different places and with different groups and individuals. So things like culture and behaviour, cultural intelligence, how you treat staff. So there's a whole kind of range of things, which for me are really important to the where you are in terms of reputation. And if you get those things together, you're going to reduce potentially the risks. You can't ever make it everything, 100% not going to happen, but you can certainly put yourself in a better position either for things not to happen or that you will be able to deal with them appropriately and avoid consequences. A lot of organisations that go through significant crisis will lose a lot of staff straight afterwards because people are just like, well, I've had enough now. I'm going to go somewhere else. So that you can minimise some of the kind of additional impacts as well that you can have. So yeah, absolutely, really critical.
And your first book, Crisis Communication Strategies, what made you then decide to then create your second book, which was about everyday communication strategies? Because that's obviously much broader than just crisis.
Yeah, interestingly, so the crisis book, I suppose, had been in my head from the aftermath of the arena, really. Something because what I wanted to do. There's some great books on crisis communication. If anybody's looked at Timothy Coombs's books, the academic books, there's some really good stuff out there. But what I wanted to do was a really practical kind of this is what it feels like, and this is the kind of practical things to think about. So it was brilliant that I got the opportunity to write that. And then in the aftermath, there was what I call a prequel. So the everyday communication strategies probably doesn't really say exactly what it is, but it is about how you deal with issues and incidents in the early stages to try and prevent getting to need that first book on crisis. And that's why I felt it was important, because the first book was very much you've got a problem and this is what you've got to do. This is how you're going to have to address it. But there's all the things that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis, which are those kind of difficult problems, thorny issues, and the chances that any one of those could grow and expand and become even more of a problem is always there.
And do you also advise organizations on how to build sort of reputational risk registers? Because a lot of organizations, they have operational risk registers, and and they don't always necessarily look at it with a reputation lens. And also, where does it sit? Which departments should it sit in? Should
Yeah.
the sort of corporate comms function have their own? Do you then have like a duplication of effort running from an operational risk perspective and a reputation risk? How do you sort of manage those thorny issues, or is it very organization sort of dependent, case by case basis?
Yeah, no, no, it's not. For me, the bottom line is, as you said, you should have your risk register should have both. You should have operational risks and reputational risks. Everybody in the business owns the reputation. It's not down to comms and PR. We have a big role to play in it, but we are not the owners of it, and we should never be. It's a business asset. It's a business element. So for me, that operational and reputational risks should always be visible to when you're looking at what lies there in terms of risk management. It's the same with we have processes for alert to an incident occurring, and if it's an operational issue that's happened, then it's pretty well structured normally for a lot of businesses, and they kick in and the incident management team, etc. But what happens when it's a reputational nightmare that you're picking up as the comms lead? Can you get all those things together and activated in the same way? And my view is absolutely you need to be able to. And we've seen over the last, 2, 3, 4 years, certainly since COVID, the impact that a reputational crisis can have. The BBC's been through lots of them. You've seen the CBI. We've seen lots of businesses absolutely, like floored by a reputational crisis. So for me, the two have to be all encompassing the same document. They have to be together, and people need to be viewing what's happening in the same way when it's a reputational issue as they do if it's the fact that something's gone wrong operationally.
And for people who want to read your books, is there a particular sequence that they should follow? Should it start off with reputation management and then crisis, then communication strategy and then crisis, or does it not really matter? What's
I've
your
never thought about it like that. That's really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That's really flawed. Me. You could look at it that way. Big reputational kind of. Where does that sit? What's the role of comms in that? Then move to what do you do with an issue, an incident, and then the crisis is the end one, possibly. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm now going to have to mull on that one. I would hope that they stand alone individually, but that together, they would be helpful. I mean, that's always the reason I've kind of written it, is that I hope that they will be of some use to people at some point.
and in the books that you've written, because I'm actually reading the reputation management one at the moment, I wanted to ask, in your mind, was it really for in-house PRs working in consulting, sort of managers? Who did you have in mind?
Um, yeah, it's a bit of. I wanted it to be. It didn't matter where you were, that there would be something useful in it. So whether you're in house or whether you're agency, that there would be elements of it that would resonate, or that you could see how you could utilize or bring elements into your work. But also that if you were a manager who's interested in reputation but doesn't understand comms, that it might, again, there'll be elements in there that can help you with that and help look at how you pull that together. So yeah, I suppose that's, but predominantly it's for comms people generally.
I was at a meeting last week, and we were talking about a strategy that has a sort of timeline of 5 years. And somebody said, "Well, in this day and age, should you really have a strategy for 5 years? Things are so sort of change fast, dynamic, changing, and it perhaps should be for a shorter term." And I wanted to sort of ask you about the
Mm.
books that you've written. You've obviously been writing books in the last sort of few years. Do this the thinking in your books, are they evergreen, or do you feel that every few years you have to update them as you have done already? Is it
Mm.
sort of timeless evergreen content, or actually the sort of dynamics, the mechanisms that are involved actually require you to constantly rethink and reframe?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I wrote the first book, The Crisis Comms Strategies, before COVID. It got published just after COVID had kind of started and we were in lockdown. Um, a lot of it, I would say, a huge percentage of it was the same even after COVID, because there are certain kind of key principles and approaches and things to think about, and structures and strategies that will kind of satisfy any situation. But there was changes that happened, and we are in a very fluctuating and changeable world. So for me, yeah, if I had the opportunity, I would probably look to say every couple of years, 2 3 years, you'd update. That's why I do put out a lot of kind of case studies and updates and things on a regular sort of basis, because of the fact that the world is so changing, and even in the last 6 months we've seen um, Twitter, or X as it's called, almost disappearing in terms of prominence. TikTok increasing in terms of its prominence when you look at kind of Ofcom studies and things that are coming through. So I think there's a big chunk of comms that is comms and how we do things that is pretty well established. And continues to service things well, but then there is the need to keep up to date with what is a very changing world.
When you look back at your 25-year career, what changes do you see? Because during COVID, all of a sudden everyone was like, unprecedented, and crisis, polycrisis is the norm, and all of a sudden our sort of language changed, and you know and we all kind of accept that things are move at a much faster pace. But when you look back at your 25 years with your crisis lens, what changes do you see? What's sort of driven those changes?
Yeah, I mean, there's been such a change. My first job as a journalist, I was on a typewriter with carbon paper. You talk about carbon paper now, and people won't know. A lot of people won't know what that is. Um, I think the speed, the ability for people to access information, the disinformation, the fact that technology is kind of overtaking a lot of things, the deep fakes, artificial intelligence, kind of opportunities and threats. When you put a lot of it down, there's sort of two channels, I think, of where the changes come from. One is the technology and how the technology is changing, and the other is people and how we're changing. And we probably have always been changing and adapting, I suppose, to things that happen. But what we're seeing now is the pace of it, that is leading to lots of issues. Polarization, globalization. There's a lot of challenges in how people are reacting to things. And whilst we are globally more interconnected now than ever, we're also very much living in our little echo chambers and bubbles as well. So I think those are the challenges that I see going forward, a lot linked to the kind of two things, the technology, but also then our view of it and how we use it.
Do you worry about the sort of the decline in legacy media, and how people now consume news through social media, and you talked about polarization, you talked about echo chambers. A lot of the algorithms on social media sort of are quite conducive to creating these echo chambers, and therefore you predict with increasing polarization there could be then more entrenched positions, and then therefore more people in essence kicking off.
Yeah, I mean, it is a worry. I think what's perhaps more worrying to me is organisations that are refusing to accept where we are, because it's almost like we're railing against the way things are rather than, would I prefer that we all, got a daily newspaper and a weekly that came through the door that gave you all your local. Well, yeah, that was what I grew up with, so of course that's going to be feel more comfortable. But the world we're in now isn't like that, and it brings with it the challenges, and it brings with it different opportunities. And I think the big worry for me is organisations that don't address where we are with things, and that don't that try to kind of go back to where we were, and love it or hate it, this is the position we're in. So I was going to say we are where we are, which is one of the most annoying phrases, but I do use it sometimes because we are. This is the reality, and I see it from policing sometimes now with cases and incidents, and I know how hard it is for them. But the world we're in, you can't just say to people, "Well, don't speculate because we can't tell you this for another week." Um, it's not going to happen. The world is going to be as it is. So you've got to find what's the way that we can deal with this ever changing kind of consumption of information, echo chambers, how people are interacting, and be able to do what we need to do. So yeah, it's I suppose it's what keeps me interested, because there's no easy answer to a lot of this, and it's challenging all of us.
And do you sometimes think about the impact of AI and how that is going to just continue to shape the landscape in unexpected ways?
Yeah, I still look at that Elon Musk robot and think, oh no, he's not coming in my house. I don't care how much I want my house cleaning, it's not going to come in. Yeah, I think some of that is quite scary, for everybody, and my dad's 80 and he tries to keep up to date with technology, and it's really scary for him because he's like, look, this is a world away from where I was as a young person. Um, so there is that to it. The what are the restrictions? How are we going to harness it in an appropriate way? But I also see the flip side of that, which is there's lots of opportunities. There's lots of real positives. I mean, in terms of the crisis management piece, the use of AI to help with data and information, to help with that early warning systems and all those sorts of things is really incredible. And the same with people in the medical. You listen to anybody in the medical profession, the amount of things it can do to help. I think would be silly to kind of rail against it, but there are going to be challenges with it, and it feels like we're only just sort of scratching the surface with a lot of it.
Do often people say that public relations is such a sort of broad industry, and some people equate PR to media relations, others, the strategic management of information that flows between an organization and its publics, which is, very a broad terrain.
Mm.
And some PRs often worry about other disciplines swimming in our lanes, particularly the strategic elements of our lanes. You've got management consulting firms, you've got law firms coming in. Do you sometimes sort of work with defamation and and media lawyers, and is it quite difficult to sort of draw a line between what they do and what you do?
Yeah, I think rather than get kind of concerned about it, we just need to find ways of working together. So I've just been in conversations with some lawyers about trying to do some some conversations around how to get the most from that kind of PR lawyer relationship, because it's always going to be there, and we're always going to be one strategic advisor for a senior person alongside the legal advisor and the HR advisor and other things. So I think it's about us keeping up to date with not just life's hard, isn't it? Keeping up to date with technology and artificial intelligence and the way people are consuming news, but also then the strategic function of a business. And that's why I think, having a seat at the top table is something that often gets talked about. Um, and it's important, but so is having the influence, and that's probably for me where it's more important is have you got influence at a senior position, and can you understand? Do you understand the business in the same way as the accountant does, and the management kind of consultants do? I think we've got a lot to offer if we can see it in that broad sense as well, and if we can see right across in terms of the spectrum of what a business does and how it operates. It's why reputation often ends up sitting with comms, because we see so broadly across a lot of aspects of what the business does. So we've got an opportunity. I would keep saying this: we've got an opportunity to be part of the solution, not the problem. And I see that in a lot of things, including how you utilize technology, and how you get the best from the business, and how you build a business, and how you kind of improve the reputation of a business.
Before we go on to our closing questions, I just wanted to ask a little bit about how you're supporting the PRCA, and a little bit about the work that you're doing with the PRCA.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with the PRCA for quite a few years now, and do a number of kind of training sessions that I run. One on crisis, and then others on like communication strategy, and I can't remember. We do a few different things. Predominantly, as I say, trying to look at giving people kind of bite-sized chunks of support that they might need. I think there's one session that I continue to do, which was around um, basically doing kind of comms and PR with no money. And we started it many years ago, and I kept thinking this is never going to be, it's going to be a short-lived thing, because, after the sort of 2010, 2011 things and how kind of challenges went. Unfortunately, I keep updating it, and it keeps being a problem that we're all facing. So, some of these things just are continuous challenges for us all.
Brilliant. Amanda, thank you so much. So you have 3 books that are out. You have courses and also consulting with organizations on both when it hits the fan, but also when people are thinking about it in terms of, how to protect the organization before it actually happens. So now down to our closing questions. Communicator. Who is the communicator you admire the most, past or present? They don't have to be a PR. They can be a PR.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one. There are a number of people working in the crisis sort of world that I have a lot of time for, and people probably wouldn't know. A lot of people won't know Donald Steele, but Donald has worked in crisis for many, many years in some kind of significant crisis. And then somebody else who I think is really kind of influential for me is Professor Lucy Easthope, who has worked a lot in disaster management. And if anybody follows her on X, on Twitter, you will know that she is very direct in her communication a lot of the time. So there's some positive aspects, I think, from how she approaches things.
Fantastic. And what about thinkers? Thinkers that have had the most impact on you. So it could be poets, philosophers, authors of books, podcast hosts.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say there's one. Try and absorb as much as I possibly can. Again, go back to the philosophy. I was always a sucker for the kind of pre-Socratic philosophers, when thinking was all kind of new and people were kind of mulling the kind of meaning of everything. And there's something joyous about that sort of original thought. Or sort of almost original thought. I should, is any thought original? Let's not go there. And podcast wise, I think there are some really amazing kind of podcasts that are out there. Obviously this one that you do, Farzana, which is fantastic, as well as there's quite stories and strategies that I listen to, and lots of others. So yeah, I try and absorb as much as I can. And authors wise, I have about 4 or 5 books normally on the go. Work ones, non-work ones. So I have a kind of eclectic kind of mix of different kind of books. And I've just went to the theatre to watch Animal Farm recently, and so I'm revisiting George Orwell, Animal Farm, and 1984 are next on my kind of reading list. Again, having read them many years ago.
It's always incredible to go back to a book that you had read sort of in your adolescence, and it feels like sort of visiting a place again, but with different eyes. It's wonderful. Now, I wanted to go back to the young Amanda studying philosophy at university. If you could give her some advice, what would it be?
Um, yeah, that's a big question. I think there's that it's okay to channel to go to plow your own furrow. It's okay to go in your own way. I think a lot of people feel as though they should do certain things. This is the path I should take. This is what I should be doing. It's to be more confident that if it's something you want to do, you can do it and you can make it happen. I am incredibly lucky. I only wanted to be a journalist, and I managed to do that. And when I set the business up, the business coach said to me, What's your backup plan?" And I went, "I haven't got one." So I think there's a bit around, if you've got that kind of, just keep single-mindedness, keep, yes, we've all got the realities of life, but if you want something, then you can make it happen, even if it takes a longer route to get there.
Really, really great advice. I think, passion is such a propellant in life. And even though you face obstacles, it just powers you through. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about mental health. So, working in crisis in itself, you're constantly dealing with unexpected change, and then also, hand holding people when they're going through a crisis. It's a very emotional time, and as PR people, we tend to have sort of high empathy, and emotional resonance is sort of contagious. How do you protect yourself when you're working, in crisis day to day? You're working with people that sometimes, they experience huge losses, rapid, overnight, be it share price loss,
Mm.
jobs, reputational loss. How do you deal with mental health, both your own as well as supporting your clients?
Yeah, and it's a really important part now of any sort of crisis response, crisis planning, is to have that built in, for businesses and organisations. That is a key part of any response. And it's something that I do discuss a lot with clients when they're going through situations, to try and help them find, or put in place things to support the staff and colleagues and people affected. On a personal level, I had ups and downs, and I think that's why I've been quite open in talking about it, because we try and be as resilient as we can be, but that isn't always going to happen. So there's a bit about being kind to yourself, which it sounds like I'm going to get one of those books, self-help books, and just reel these things off. But it's true. If anybody's been listening, I've got an audio book of the Miranda Hart's new book that's come out, really worth listening to, because there's a lot of this about, we must achieve and we must do certain things, and we put this extra pressure on ourselves. So I think it's trying to be a bit kind to yourself when you are going through difficult situations, finding that, having that network, that support network around you, whoever that is and whatever form that is, and also taking time away. And I think that's the bit that we as comms and PR people really struggle with, because we don't want to disconnect, and we've got the social media going, or we've got the news on, and there's a bit where you've just got to let your brain manage what it's dealing with, and sort of, decompress and make sense of it. So I love going swimming, basically because when I'm swimming, you can't think of anything else but swimming. So I tend to just focus on that. And I think it's that sort of, going back to the mindfulness, it's that bit of finding something for you that you can just be in the moment. So I do that, and I do some painting. So again, once you're doing that, you're absorbed in it. So whatever it is that works for you, as whatever your thing is that gives you that moment, that's the thing you've got to do, and never be afraid to say, "I need to step away." I think we need to all be a bit more kind of accepting of, I am struggling with this now. I need to step away, for a little bit. COVID was very different, and I think this is what's affected a lot of the way we think about resilience, because we were all living it and working it at the same time, which made it really difficult to step away, because there was no way you could step away too. You were kind of stuck in this. That's not the case, and that's not how it normally is for most things. So definitely having time away, and if you really are really struggling, is to get some kind of professional help. I've had it on 2 or 3 occasions for different things, and much as when I was younger, I was like, I don't need this, I'll be absolutely fine. It's always been a massive help. So yeah, there's lots of really good resources out there.
Amanda, there could be a book in that.
I'm not doing a self-help book. There's lots of really good self-help books out there,
Never
but
say
yeah,
never.
no.
Amanda, tell me, if listeners would like to learn more about you, if they want, do you have a blog? Do you post on LinkedIn? Could you just give us a
Yeah.
steer on how we can learn more through your eyes?
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's like I think I'm just on everything and annoy people probably intensely. So I have so you can find my website amandacolemancoms.co.uk. I am on LinkedIn, so find me on that. I do try and put bits and pieces out on LinkedIn as much as I can, and lots of kind of case studies and I do a fortnightly newsletter, and I also do a blog which occasionally I will ramble on about something that's usually annoyed me or sparked a thought, and that's just Amanda Com's blog, so you should be able to Google that and find that.
And in terms of the courses that you run, where can they find information about that?
Yeah, that's on the website, and it's also there's some posts on LinkedIn. But if anybody wants to just get in touch with me, I can send more details.
And I assume your books are on Amazon. Do you also have audiobooks as well?
No, I don't have
Mm.
audiobooks, and that's partly because it costs extra to do audiobooks, and I haven't done one. And nobody'd want to hear me reading them because that would be awful. But yeah, they're on Amazon. Most kind of online books. I don't just like to promote Jeff Bezos's Amazon, and Kogan Page, who are the publishers, so you can get them on their website as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing with us your incredible journey through crisis. Now, I wanted to just also thank you for listening. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts alongside other episodes. If you do like what you hear, then do share so we can grow our community. And if you have any feedback or topics you wish us to cover, do contact us. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so stay tuned as we have some more inspiring stories in the pipeline.